and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, after winning the French election, can new French President Macron unite a bitterly divided country? And Venezuela's opposition say that President Maduro is trying to postpone elections. So how can the country free itself from the political and economic gridlock? We begin in France, of course, where centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron will be the country's next president. He defeated the National Front's Marine Le Pen with 65% of the vote. Macron has called his victory a new page for the country's history. CGTN's Kate Parkinson reports from Paris.
As French President-elect Emmanuel Macron arrived at the iconic pyramid of Paris's Musée du Louvre, the moment was full of symbolism. Beethoven's Ode to Joy is the anthem of the European Union, a fitting choice for a man who ran his campaign on a strong pro-European platform.
L'Europe et le monde attendent que nous
Europe and the world are waiting for us to defend anything with our spirit of light, threatened by all kinds of places. They expect us to defend the liberties, that we protect the oppressed.
Les libertés, que nous protégions les opprimés.
Many in France are celebrating not only Macron's win, but also the defeat of his far-right rival Marine Le Pen. But Macron chided his supporters for booing at the mention of her name and instead urged the country to come together.
Je veux enfin avoir un mot.
I want to see a word for those who voted for Madame Le Pen today. Don't boo them. They expressed a form of anger today, a disillusionment in our convictions. I respect them, but I will do everything I can over the next 5 years to make sure there is no more reason to vote for the extremes.
But uniting France will not be easy. Le Pen's score is still an historic high for France's far right, and as she conceded defeat, she also claimed the mantle of France's main opposition.
Through this historic, massive result, the French people have elected this patriotic and republican alliance as the primary opposition.
Macron acknowledged that the task facing him is immense and said he will start work immediately. But for now, at least, there is time to celebrate and reflect on his incredible journey to the Élysée Palace. What Emmanuel Macron has done is remarkable. 3 years ago, hardly anyone in France had even heard of him. A year ago, his political movement, En Marche, didn't even exist. But now, he's the president of France, the youngest president the country has ever had. Kate Parkinson, CGTN, Paris.
So what happens now after Emmanuel Macron's sweep to victory? Joining us from Paris, we got two panelists. The one is Cui Tongjian, who is the director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. He's traveling to France to look at the election over there. Welcome to our program. Also in Paris, joining us, we have Mr. Barthélemy Gourmand, who is the senior research fellow at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. And welcome back, certainly, Mr. Gourmand, to our program. I want to start with you. 66%, 34%. That's how Mr. Macron defeated Ms. Le Pen. Is that a sweeping victory if you are looking at the prospect that probably the latter is going to establish the largest opposition party?
Well, as you have mentioned earlier in your short program, it is a historic result for Marine Le Pen's movement. It's historically high. More than 10 million French people voted for the far-right movement in the second round of the election. So she has many reasons for being satisfied of that election, considering that, let's face it, she had a very, very narrow chance of winning that election. So that result is already of a huge satisfaction for her. On the other side, we have to be quite satisfied with Macron's result, considering that overall he had more voters than François Hollande 5 years ago. So yes, it could have been better, but it's already a significant number of voters. And I do believe that this is a message sent not only to the rest of the world, and he made it clear in his speech that you have also mentioned in your program, but he also made it clear to the French voters for the coming legislative election in 5 weeks from now.
Yes. It is going to be quite interesting if we're looking at the upcoming elections, the seats in the parliament, how it's likely to be fought out. Mr. Cui, with the presidential election result, how do you think that's likely to be?
Yes, I think that maybe we can find out perhaps the two tendencies for the forthcoming legislative election in June. Because as we know, once this, I think, division among the mainstream party or some, very, very difficult choices for average people, perhaps it will have another, I think, maybe a disordered situation happen in June for this parliamentary election. Because as we know so far, for the mainstream parties, even they lost in the presidential election, but now they got preparation for the parliamentary election. And also at the same time, another very big question for Mr. Macron or President Macron is how could he lead her very, very young party to go into this, I think, a competition for this legislative election.
But many wonder whether it is really a young party, Mr. Gouvernement, because it is a party, of course, being established just for 1 year, and yet you see many of the backbone personnel in this party have been with so-called establishment parties for a long time, and centrist is nothing new to France, I guess, for some years. So is it going to be fresh new, or actually they're going to tread some of the previously well-established roads?
Well, I think this is really the big question at the moment, and Mr. Cui raised that very important point, how to lead a country with a country that virtually does not exist. We have to remind our audience that right now, En Marche, Macron's movement, has absolutely no parliament seats. So he has to gain a majority out of nowhere, out of nothing. So it will be his first and extremely difficult task in the next 5 weeks to manage to get a majority out of course, the will of several people who will join his movement. And of course, we observe a significant number of people joining his movement, not only the civil society, but also some political actors from various parties. But he will also have notably by joining a government, by shaping a government that responds to the expectations of the majority of the people, he will have to make sure that he will gain supporters from the right and the left. And of course, that will be his first challenge as a president.
Mr. Gouvernement, he talked about the president now, Macron, a new page for France history. That's, of course, easier said than done. What kind of page is that? Is it going to be an exciting page, or is it going to be a so-so page? And meanwhile, what is likely to be on his agenda, given that the populist movement is still quite high in Europe, and also the economy, that is the central issue. Mr. Gouvernement, do you see any signs that he might do something dramatic?
Well, that's a very important question. I believe that this election brings a lot of symbols. You have mentioned the age, extremely young age of France's new president. He's the youngest president in France's history. He is also the youngest leader of the G20 and one of the youngest leaders in the world at the moment. So this is a very important symbol of the youth, a new generation of leaders taking power in Western democracy. So this is a very important symbol, and we could feel in Paris last night after the result this sort of sense of hope among the population, hope for something new, some new generation of leaders sweeping out this old establishment. So this is really something that we can expect from
you probably could
this
say
new
that, Mr.
government
Gourmand.
and
You
this
probably
new
could say that
tendency. On the other side,
yeah, the age probably is an issue, but you know, when you look at President Obama, when you look at the Canadian Prime Minister, they're already the new generation on the horizon for quite some time. The real thing is whether President Macron is really like to come up with something. I mean, centrist, that's what his party is all about, quote unquote. That means internationalism, that means pro-Europeanism, that means not necessarily going to the extremes on many of the social issues as well. So Blairism, you know, just you can throw all of these isms onto his shoulder, but will he be able to follow that in a very different circumstances? That's the question. Very briefly from you, Mr. Gourmand.
Yes, that's a very important point here. Yes, he is young, but the question is politics going to be young also? Is it going to be new, or is it going to be exactly like what we have observed in the past 30 years? And this is what his opponents are already accusing him of. They say, well, you're young, but your politics are not. So this is really the challenge for Mr. Macron, trying to provide something new, trying to create some new hope and some new movement in this country. It's going to be a very difficult task, and of course the choice of the Prime Minister and the members of the government will be already giving some signs, some elements to understand what exactly is going on. But I believe, to answer your question in a little bit more detail on a very important point, that Macron has been focusing a lot on the importance of European Union and the implications of France within European Union. He will meet with Angela Merkel just a few days after he is officially the president of France. He will join a NATO summit just a few weeks later, and also a G7 summit. And we will see, I believe, during these different events, what sort of tendency he wants to give to his governance, at least at the beginning of his presidency.
Right, Mr. Cui, here comes the critical moment, isn't it? It is not just the campaigning. This is the governing moment, and that is when the truth really comes out.
Yes, exactly. I think that now there will be some more, there will be some bigger challenges facing to the new president or young president or new government in future. Because also besides this very, very difficult issue in security, economy, and immigration, some other. And also now I think the biggest challenge for this new president and his new party is how to deal with some systemic or some mechanism issue. Especially just like our French guest mentioned that yes, they will, Mr. Macron will try to provide some more hope. But I think that now the French people, they lack not only the feeling or of hope. They want to some more maybe practical change, especially by the new president, the new government. But now I think that maybe the big question for France and for French government is how to take the steps and to decide the proper timing and how to decide the priorities, especially in a very, very difficult time.
Priority is extremely important, and also important is the early harvest. As people are looking at change, they expect immediate results. They want to be satisfied, just as on social media these days, people want to have immediate response from a new government. Can that be done, Mr. Gourmand? We have already seen President Trump from the United States and also Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany congratulate President Macron in big way and willing to work with him. But willing to work with him, what does that mean? We don't know. Also, international environment could be quite important for him, Mr. Gourmand.
Well, I do totally agree on the fact that the French voters won't let any time to Mr. Macron to provide some responses to what they really want, what they really need. He will have to be efficient, he will have to be quick, he will have to be probably immediate on some particular points. So yes, he has to face enormous challenges, and I think this is why he took this decision to meet Madame Merkel as soon as possible. They have to think together new ways to reboost European Union, new ways to somehow give a new trajectory to the European construction.
But what could be some of these new ways, Mr. Gourmand?
On both international and domestic issues.
Mr. Gourmand, what could be some of these new ways that you just mentioned? Any inspirations at this point?
Well, you know that France and Germany have been somehow a little bit diverging in the past few years on how to stimulate the European economy. And of course, this election in France was regarded as some sort of test for what kind of a proposal exactly we are going to provide within this European Union. Is France going to be one of the leaders, or is it going to quit, not European Union, of course, but its responsibilities within the Union? And I believe that the message sent by the election of Mr. Macron and his speech, again, his speech last night was extremely important. He mentioned European Union several times. He used the ode to joy, the European anthem to enter the Louvre Palace just before he made his speech. And all these symbols, along with the fact that during his campaign he repeatedly announced his strong attachment to the European values, to the European construction, to the defense of the euro as well. And I believe that this is really where he can provide some new not way exactly, but some new attachment of France to the European construction. And this is exactly what our European partners are expecting from France right now.
Well, that may be what partners are expecting from other countries, but what about the voters here in France? The major labor issues, of course, has been facing France right now. Mr. Cui, do you think these old tricks, as some say, going to the core values of European Union and one Europe and one euro, will that likely to solve the latest problem? Old tricks solve the latest problems?
Yes, I think that according to Mr. Macron's commitment, he regarded himself as a pro-globalization, pro-European integration figure. But now I think that if we look at some issues practically, we can find that firstly, once Mr. Macron wants to play a more positive role in European integration and in promoting especially this confidence from other member states to European Union, firstly, he should try to keep a very good relations, especially in work with his counterpart in Germany, because as we know always, this the code dynamic for European integration of this cooperation between France and Germany. But another question I think that every kind of effort from France, from President Macron, to try to restart or energy this European integration, the France should deal with firstly its own economic issue, its own economic development issue, because as we know, once there is a weaker and weaker French economy in Europe, it will, I think, it will do nothing to help the
he has to deal with the economic
credibility
issues
of France.
But the question is really,
the
question really is how. That's exactly what I'm trying to ask from both of you. It seems that there's still a lot of brainstorming going on before we reach any kinds of inspiration, it seems. But gentlemen, let me ask you a question from another direction. That is, really, is it populism is rising up in a dramatic way in Europe? Really? After the Brexit, we see Netherlands election. Populism did not win the majority. Now we see another election here in France. It seems that that's the case too. So the coming up Germany election, many say this is already a boost giving to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. So the fear of the rise of populism, is that really true to a full extent, Mr. Gourmand?
Well, that's a tricky question, of course. I mean, if you observe the rise of some extremist movements and also new sort of movements, we can answer yes. And as a matter of fact, the emergence of Macron is one of them. We must remind the audience that Macron was totally unknown to the French public only 3 years ago, before he became François Hollande's Minister of the Economy. And his emergence has been extremely fast, based on a party that virtually doesn't exist. It's not even a party, it's just a movement. So it is a part of this populism, centered populism in that case.
Right.
But it is somehow some tendency that we have observed through Europe in the past few years. But on the other side, we may consider that probably the biggest issue in Europe at the moment is not much the emergence of new sort of parties, but the difficulties that the so-called traditional parties are facing. And in France's election, we have observed that both the Republican and the Socialist Party, these parties that have led France for the past 50 years, if not more, did not even qualify to the second round of the election. And this is probably the biggest lesson of this election. There's something new, there's some new expectations from the French public opinion. Yeah. And this is indeed something that we have also observed in other European countries, with different results, of course, and Brexit is one of them.
We'll see what's going to happen. Meanwhile, another phenomenon out of this election, that is, once you catches the eyeballs, you're going to go to the final rounds. That's true for Mrs. Le Pen. That is also true for Mr. Macron, given his very atypical family situation. And that has been widely reported in the press. So, Mr. Cui, is that really the nature of our elections these days in democracies that we have witnessed recently? Both Mr. Trump and now we see Mr. Macron as well. Eyeballs means votes, is it, Mr. Cui?
Oh yes, I think that now maybe a very big question now for this recent, especially Western democracy, is how could we make clear the division or dividing line between the democracy and the populist? Because also because of the internet, because of globalization, certainly there will be a more and more or bigger requirement for this face-to-face exchange, especially by this new media instrument, especially for some politicians to introduce them their ways to spread their commitment to average people, everything. But now I think that perhaps the big challenge now for this so-called Western democracy is how could try to play, especially for the elite, play a leading role, or maybe in a responsible way to help average people to understand what will happen once they choose some politicians. They're just good at to show them their ways, but they lack of some very, I think, good thinking about their policy, about the future of the nation and the country. I think it would be a very big question, not only for now, for this moment, and also for future.
Mr. Guillemot, on a lighter note, and my final question for you as well, this first family now is certainly atypical according to some media commentaries. It seems there's a lot of pressure, it seems, to make everything work for this first family in front of the rest of the world. Is it?
Well, there is a lot of pressure. I believe that there's a lot of expectations about this election. And for the first time, this election has been followed in the rest of the world with extremely high attention. And I think the context plays a very significant role. We have mentioned the Brexit. We have mentioned Trump's election. We have mentioned also the so-called fake news that somehow disrupted this campaign. It has been a dirty campaign to some extent. And indeed, there are many expectations about what will be France's move now that the voters have indeed rejected populism and the rise of extremist movements. So what will be the lessons to the rest of the world? What will be also France's commitment in many issues? Emmanuel Macron has mentioned last night after his victory France's commitment to the climate change initiatives, and especially the Paris Treaty. He has also mentioned European Union. We talked about that earlier. He has also mentioned the strong attachment to particular global values, including security, including providing some assistance to people in need. So that will be extremely important to see in the following weeks what will be exactly the possibility for the new government to put into action all these promises.
Okay. Barthelemy Gourmand and Cui Hongjian, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. And you are watching World Insight with Tian Wei, still to come on our program. Venezuela's opposition say that President Maduro is trying to postpone elections. So how can the country free itself from the political and economic gridlock? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live Monday to Friday on CGTN. Tens of thousands of women took to the streets of Caracas and other Venezuelan cities over the past weekend, speaking out against the President Nicolas Maduro and calling for peace in the crisis-wracked nation. According to Venezuela's state prosecutor's office, clashes between Maduro supporters and the country's opposition party have claimed at least 37 lives. 717 have been injured and hundreds arrested in the widespread unrest. Opposition party demands Maduro to step down even.
After months of violence, mothers of Venezuela rallied in its capital city, Caracas, calling for an end to bloodshed.
We women came here to say no to violence. We want no more deaths. We want no more aggression. We want no more terrorism. We don't want more deaths of young people.
The protests began in early April against President Nicolas Maduro, who wants to create a new constitution. The opposition party slams President Maduro, saying he wants to avoid a popular vote through fraudulent means.
Of course, if he was calling for a constituent assembly, we would jump at it because it would allow us to resolve the structural problems of our country. But this is not a constituent assembly. In the best case scenario, this is a disguise to create a new Congress for the country.
The opposition, which has majority support in Venezuela after years of being in the shadow of the ruling Socialist Party, is demanding that delayed state elections be held and the 2018 presidential vote be brought forward. Venezuela's full-year economic recession has caused shortages of food and medicine. Polls suggest Maduro's party will have difficulty winning another presidential election. Maduro says opponents are seeking a coup with U.S. support and harbor terrorists and murderers in their rank. The 54-year-old successor to Hugo Chavez is setting up a super body known as a Constituent Assembly, with powers to rewrite the constitution, shake up public powers, and potentially replace the legislature. But Maduro insists he's open for dialogue with his opponents and is willing to end the violence.
For more on the ongoing Venezuela crisis, we are joined in Caracas by Mr. Daniel Furman, who is a researcher for the Center for Political Studies and the Andres Bello Catholic University. In Washington, D.C., we are joined by Maricruz McGowan, Vice President of the National Economist Club. And also in Washington, we have invited Eric Farnsworth, Vice President of the American Society and Council of the Americas. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to start with you. Inside Venezuela, Mr. Furman, what exactly is the problem, do you think, facing Venezuelan economies these days that people are getting so upset?
Well, in the last month, we've seen street protests take over the whole country. And that stems from a decision from the Supreme Court, which basically annulled the National Assembly, which is now controlled by the opposition. So Venezuelans have taken to the streets with a very specific plan. They're calling for respect for the National Assembly. They're calling for free and fair elections, for the liberation of the political prisoners, for the government to free political prisoners, and for a humanitarian effort to be allowed to enter the country. Venezuela is undergoing the worst crisis in history. There is no food, there are no medicines, and democracy is really in peril as the government is transforming from what we call a competitive authoritarianism into a full-fledged dictatorship.
But Mr. Fermin, there's also been complaints coming from the Venezuelan government right now. The administration was talking about, Western strategy trying to topple down its government.
Well, it's really that's not the case at all. That's part of the rhetoric. That is part of the government's newspeak, if you will. The reality is that democracy is really under attack by the government. When you take a look at the fact we were supposed to have elections to elect governors, state governors, and state legislators in December, those elections were not organized. Later, Venezuelans petitioned for a recall referendum to democratically oust Mr. President Maduro. That was also aborted by the National Electoral Council, which is co-opted by the president and the ruling party. So now the opposition's agenda is not a violent agenda. It is not an agenda that calls for intervention by foreign powers. It is an agenda that only passes through elections, through having the people have the last call. And that is what Mr. Maduro is set on not allowing to happen. So all those arguments are wrong. What we're looking at now is very different from what we looked at in the past, in the sense that Venezuela has been a very polarized society in the last 20 years. But what we've seen in the last 3-4 years is that it's no longer about two halves of the country having different views on the country's future or the country's political system. What we're seeing now is 86% of the population telling the government that it wants change. And that includes former Chavistas, and that even includes some current Chavistas that don't identify with President Maduro.
Right. But Mr. Farnsworth, at this point, there seems to be such a sharp difference between, let's just say, the majority, according to Mr. Fermin mentioned in the survey in Venezuela, and the government itself about their different views how to approach with the country's future. Is there any common ground that can be talked about?
Well, I think Daniel Fermin is exactly right in his analysis, and the common ground is quickly eroding. And in part, that's because the government has made very clear that its top agenda is to remain in power, and it will do whatever needs to be done to remain in power. The people of Venezuela, many of them are not terribly political. They just want to have access to food and health care and a secure job. They want to improve the lives of their family, and under Chavismo, their living circumstances have been decreasing. And in fact, the promises of Chavismo have clearly not been met, and the situation is getting worse. So I think what you're seeing is an increasing polarization that has been brought on primarily by the government. There's no question about it. And the only avenue left to the opposition and even the non-political population of Venezuela is to go to the streets and peacefully protest, and it's the government that's oppressing them. So this is a situation I think that could be fixed, but the government is going to have to change course.
Change course, that means probably not only on the political issues, but also working harder on the economic ones. Take a look at how economic crisis has been evolving in Venezuela. Prices rose about 800% in the year 2016, with the IMF predicting inflation could hit 2,200% by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the economy shrunk by 18.6% last year. That's according to Reuters' latest number. Even though we have long realized problem of overdependence on oil, but how to walk out of this economic crisis for the Venezuelan government and, of course, for the people. Big question, Ms. McGowan.
Well, I am not very convinced that removing President Maduro is going to solve the problem. This is a problem that started 19 years ago that literally changed the culture of Venezuelans people. What happened there is they had a president, Mr. Chavez, a populist that promised them not a job, but a check, a house, health care, and everything for free and they were not complaining. You didn't hear this kind of protest for 15, 16 years. Why? Because they were still receiving things for free. That is not sustainable. As Winston Churchill said, first you distribute wealth, then you distribute misery, and that's what we are seeing in Venezuela. What happened with Mr. Chavez died and was replaced by Mr. Maduro. Things didn't improve, it actually got worse. Why? Because the price of oil went down. There was no way to keep giving people things for free, and now they are going out to the streets and asking for the removal of President Maduro. But my guess is, and I am almost sure, if he's removed, somebody else will replace him, and the problem will remain.
Right.
This is going to take years to be fixed.
What about
years,
that?
But it has to start by the Venezuelan people.
What about that, Mr. Furman? I mean, the economic and political crisis, as Ms. McGowan mentioned, keep on feeding one another to go on a vicious cycle, and probably even more. Change of one person not likely to solve the problem, rather, Mr. Furman.
Well, it certainly would be a step in the right direction. It's true, Venezuela has had a high dependency on oil for the last 100 years that has determined the political and social and economic life for its citizens. However, we've seen in the last 10 years, especially ever since Mr. Chavez in 2007 started a very aggressive confiscation policy of lands and businesses, a real war on production and war on productive sectors of the population by the government. So it's really a case of an economic model that does not work when oil prices are not high. So what we have now is a situation where people no longer demand a change in the government, but a change of the government.
Right.
So people have come to terms with the fact that the solutions will not come from any sort of government action, but by the changing of the administration.
Wow.
And that would allow for workers and businesses and landowners to get the economy moving again, because right now, at the current moment, the private sector is viewed as the enemy by the government, and there is a strong, not only centralized, but also a very strong state-oriented economy, which is not working for the Venezuelan people.
Mr. Farnsworth, inside the country, there could be different beliefs as to what eventually could work, but also external environment extremely important as well. President Trump comes into power, did not have much time at all to think about his strategy toward his neighbors besides building the wall crisis. So what is it going to be, the relations between Washington and Caracas as a result of the current crisis going on? Meanwhile, you also see Venezuela going out to the other countries in other continents, China included, and others as well, for help and for cooperation. Will outside factors be able to help with the current, at least immediate crisis in any way, Mr. Farnsworth?
This is one of the more interesting aspects, in my view, of the whole crisis, and that is the international support that used to exist, perhaps, for Chavismo has been eroding, particularly in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. Countries that were supporters of President Chavez and then President Maduro have subsequently changed course and have called for a release of political prisoners and different implementation of human rights and the meeting of commitments under the Inter-American Democratic Charter. And other countries, I think, globally are recognizing that this model in Venezuela is unsustainable, and that the more they offer support for the model, not the individual, but the model, this is a losing game over time, for all the reasons we've already discussed. In terms of the United States, I mean, I think the Trump administration clearly has priorities globally. It's unclear where Venezuela ranks in that scenario, but I would say that the U.S. Congress has become very motivated on Venezuela, particularly the Senate, but also the House, which has taken a bipartisan approach to try to urge the U.S. to take a stronger position, and also to do things like offer humanitarian assistance. This is really interesting. The people of Venezuela want it. The government doesn't, because the government says there's no humanitarian crisis. So why do we need assistance? Well, they need assistance because people are starving in their country. And so this is something that I think the United States and the international community can do.
Well, Ms. McGowan, sometimes the outside factor could be a plus in solving the problem. Sometimes it could work the other way around. We all understand in different crises. What do you think about what President Maduro now faces? Given the current crisis, what can be some of the immediate actions he can take to lessen the pressure, at least politically, on him, but at the same time doing real things for the people? Ms. McGowan.
I think the first thing he should do is resign. He should resign. Sooner or later he will be out peacefully or not peacefully, and I think he should do that because of the love of his country, if he has some love left for Venezuela. Second, he should leave more power to the National Assembly and try to help his country by removing himself from that scenario, going away and letting the National Assembly to keep going. About the international help, obviously, we expect the neighboring countries to help, but I think China, and I thank China in the name of the Venezuelans, because without the help of China, I think they would have collapsed even much earlier.
Well, there are a lot of things going on inside that country. It is very hard for us to understand everything about all the details, but certainly some analysis from different perspectives could help, we believe. Daniel Furman, Mary Cruz McGowan, and Eric Farnsworth, thank you so much for joining us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and China's Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight with Tian Wei team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights from across China and around the world. Good night.